October 12, 1942, the steaming jungles of Guadalcanal echo with the crack of rifle fire as Marine Private First Class Daniel Murphy crouches behind a fallen log, sweat streaming down his face despite the pre-dawn darkness. He's been pinned down for 3 hours by a Japanese sniper who seems to have supernatural ability to spot American positions from impossible distances. Murphy shifts slightly, and immediately a bullet splinters the bark inches from his helmet. The enemy shooter can see him perfectly while remaining completely invisible himself. This is the nightmare every Allied soldier faces in the Pacific theater. Japanese spotters possess an almost mystical ability to detect camouflaged positions that should be invisible. American camouflage, designed for European forests, stands out like neon signs against tropical vegetation. British patterns fare no better. The Japanese have spent decades perfecting concealment techniques in Asian jungles, and they're systematically picking off Allied forces who might as well be wearing target practice uniforms. What Murphy doesn't know, what none of the Allied command structure knows yet, is that 400 miles away in Port Moresby, New Guinea, a civilian tailor named Samuel Chen is about to solve this problem with a technique so simple, so effective, and so completely against military regulations that it will be banned by 3 different Allied commanders before saving thousands of lives. Chen isn't supposed to be innovating military camouflage. He's supposed to be repairing torn uniforms and replacing missing buttons. Born in Hong Kong in 1898, Chen learned his trade in his father's shop on Nathan Road, specializing in custom suits for British colonial officers. When the Japanese invaded Hong Kong in December 1941, Chen escaped on one of the last evacuation ships, carrying nothing but his sewing kit and 40 years of experience working with fabric, dye, and the subtle art of making things appear differently than they actually are. The Allied command assigns Chen to the 32nd Infantry Division's supply depot in Port Moresby with explicit instructions: repair damaged uniforms using standard procedures and approved materials only. No modifications, no improvements, no creative interpretations. Military equipment belongs to the government, and unauthorized alterations constitute destruction of government property, punishable by court-martial. But Chen cannot ignore what he sees every day: stretchers carrying wounded soldiers whose camouflage failed them, body bags holding men who were spotted by Japanese observers despite following every concealment protocol in the field manual. The standard American camouflage pattern, designed for oak and maple forests, creates perfect silhouettes against bamboo and tropical ferns. On October 15, 1942, Chen receives a batch of uniforms from the 126th Infantry Regiment that tells a horrifying story: 14 sets of fatigues, all with bullet holes clustered around the chest and head areas. Clean shots from concealed positions. The Japanese aren't just outfighting American forces, they're outseeing them. That evening, Chen walks to the edge of the supply depot, where captured Japanese equipment sits in sorted piles awaiting intelligence analysis. He studies enemy uniforms with the trained eye of a professional tailor who has spent decades understanding how fabric interacts with light, shadow, and human perception. The revelation hits him like artillery fire. Japanese camouflage doesn't try to match the jungle perfectly. Instead, it creates visual confusion through irregular patterns that break up human outline recognition. The colors aren't exactly right for any specific environment, but they're wrong in ways that make human eyes struggle to focus on them. More importantly, Chen notices something the military intelligence officers missed entirely. Japanese camouflage uses a technique called visual noise, small, seemingly random elements that force the human brain to work harder to identify familiar shapes. It's not about hiding in the environment, it's about making the observer's eyes slide past without registering conscious recognition. Chen returns to his workbench and begins sketching. His design violates every principle of approved military camouflage. Instead of large geometric shapes in regulation colors, he draws intricate patterns of tiny irregular elements, not leaves or branches, but abstract forms that suggest vegetation without actually representing it. Colors that are close to jungle tones but deliberately off in ways that create visual uncertainty. The technique comes from his experience tailoring for British officers who wanted to appear more imposing than they actually were. Subtle alterations in fabric patterns could make a short man look taller, a thin man look broader, a nervous man look confident. The same principles applied in reverse could make a soldier look like empty jungle. On October 18th, Chen tests his theory on a single uniform jacket using fabric dyes he's mixed from local plants and minerals. The result looks wrong to his trained eye, almost amateurish compared to standard military patterns. The colors don't match anything in nature exactly, and the pattern seems random, chaotic, perfect. Chen approaches Corporal Eddie Martinez, a supply clerk who's become friendly during their shared night shifts. Martinez takes one look at the modified jacket and shakes his head immediately. "Chen, that's the ugliest damn camouflage I've ever seen. Looks like someone threw paint at a uniform and called it a day." but Martinez is curious enough to test it. The next morning, he wears Chen's modified jacket while conducting routine supply inspections around the depot perimeter. 3 different sentries fail to notice him walking past their positions in broad daylight. Not because he's particularly stealthy, but because their eyes simply don't register his presence as significant. The test results are so dramatic that Martinez brings the jacket to Staff Sergeant William Thompson, the depot's senior non-commissioned officer. Thompson examines the modification with the skepticism of a career soldier who has seen every shortcut and corner-cutting scheme imaginable. "This isn't regulation camouflage," Thompson states flatly. "The colors are wrong, the pattern is unauthorized, and I'm pretty sure those dyes aren't approved for military equipment." Chen stands at attention, knowing his unauthorized modification could result in disciplinary action or worse. "Sergeant, the regulation camouflage isn't working. Men are dying because Japanese spotters can see them too easily." Thompson stares at the jacket for a long moment. "You're telling me this civilian Tailor figured out something our military engineers couldn't?" Before Chen can respond, the conversation is interrupted by the arrival of Lieutenant Colonel Frank Ross, the depot commander, conducting his weekly inspection. Ross notices the unusual uniform immediately and demands an explanation. What follows is the kind of confrontation that determines whether innovation flourishes or dies in military bureaucracy. Ross examines Chen's modification with growing alarm. The unauthorized dyes, the non-regulation pattern, the complete departure from approved procedures. "This is exactly the kind of unauthorized experimentation I will not tolerate," Ross declares. "Military equipment specifications exist for reasons: color consistency, pattern recognition, supply chain standardization. This Tailor has violated multiple regulations." Thompson interrupts carefully. "Sir, the modification appears to be effective. Corporal Martinez conducted field tests that suggest improved concealment capabilities." "I don't care if it makes men invisible," Ross snaps. "It's unauthorized. Remove this modification immediately and ensure this Tailor understands he's here to repair uniforms, not redesign them." Chen watches his innovation being dismissed by the same institutional thinking that has been getting soldiers killed. But he also notices something Ross misses entirely. During the heated discussion, 3 different soldiers walking past the depot office fail to notice the modified jacket hanging on Thompson's desk chair. Their eyes sweep across it without conscious recognition. The forbidden camouflage works so well that it's practically invisible even during direct examination. That night, Chen makes a decision that will either save thousands of lives or end his military service in court-martial proceedings. He's going to continue modifying uniforms in secret, creating a supply of forbidden camouflage for soldiers who need concealment more than they need regulation compliance. What he doesn't know is that Japanese intelligence officers have been tracking Allied camouflage effectiveness and have recently reported to Imperial headquarters that American forces pose minimal concealment threat due to inadequate jungle adaptation techniques. They're about to be proven catastrophically wrong. October 22nd, 1942. Chen works by candlelight in the abandoned supply tent behind the motor pool, his hands moving with the practiced precision of 4 decades spent manipulating fabric and dye. Around him, 23 modified uniforms hang from makeshift clotheslines, each one a violation of military regulations that could result in court-martial if discovered. The process takes him 6 hours per uniform. First, he soaks the fabric in a solution of crushed ironwood bark and fermented palm oil, creating a base tone that exists nowhere in standard military color charts. Then comes the delicate work of applying his pattern, using brushes made from stripped bamboo fibers and dyes extracted from local plants, his Chinese botanical knowledge identified as containing the right chemical compounds. The pattern itself defies every principle of military camouflage design. Instead of attempting to mimic specific vegetation, Chen creates what he calls visual static, tiny, irregular shapes in colors that are almost right but deliberately wrong enough to confuse human pattern recognition. The human brain expects to see familiar forms, leaves, branches, shadows. Chen gives it something that suggests those forms without actually representing them. The technique draws on principles he learned tailoring for wealthy clients in Hong Kong. A man's suit could make him appear more successful, more confident, more imposing through subtle manipulations of line and color that operated below conscious awareness. Chen applies the same psychology in reverse, creating uniforms that make the wearer forgettable, unremarkable, invisible to casual observation. By October 25th, Chen has completed modifications on 37 uniforms. He distributes them through a network of sympathetic supply clerks who understand that effective camouflage matters more than regulation compliance. The recipients are carefully chosen, experienced soldiers who won't draw attention to the unauthorized modifications. Private First Class Tommy Kowalski receives his modified uniform on October 27th and immediately notices how wrong it looks compared to standard issue camouflage. The colors seem muddy, imprecise. The pattern appears random, almost amateurish. But when he tests it during routine patrol duties around the depot perimeter, something remarkable happens. Kowalski walks past 3 different guard posts in broad daylight. The sentries see him, but their eyes slide past without registering his presence as significant. Not invisible, but unimportant, below the threshold of conscious attention. When he deliberately tries to attract notice by waving, the guards respond immediately, but until that moment, he might as well have been part of the landscape. The forbidden camouflage operates on psychological principles the military doesn't understand. Standard camouflage attempts perfect mimicry of natural environments. Chen's design exploits flaws in human visual processing, creating patterns that the brain struggles to categorize and therefore tends to ignore. Word spreads through unofficial channels with the speed that only truly effective innovations achieve in combat zones. By November 1st, soldiers throughout the 32nd Infantry Division are quietly requesting Chen's modifications, not through official channels which would result in immediate prohibition, but through the informal networks that actually run military operations. Staff Sergeant William Thompson finds himself in an impossible position. The unauthorized camouflage clearly works. Soldiers wearing Chen's modifications report significantly improved concealment during reconnaissance missions. Japanese spotters who consistently detected standard camouflage positions seem unable to focus effectively on troops wearing the forbidden patterns. But Thompson also knows that Lieutenant Colonel Ross has explicitly banned the modifications. Any official acknowledgement of their effectiveness would constitute direct insubordination. The institutional pressure to suppress innovation conflicts with the tactical reality that Chen's technique saves lives. The tension reaches crisis point on November 8th when Captain Robert Hayes, commanding officer of Baker Company, arrives at the supply depot demanding answers. 3 of his men return from patrol wearing obviously unauthorized camouflage modifications, and Hayes wants to know who's responsible. "These uniforms don't match any approved pattern," Hayes states, holding up one of Chen's modifications. "The colors are wrong. The design is completely non-standard, and I'm pretty sure those dyes violate health and safety regulations." Thompson chooses his words carefully. "Sir, the modifications appear to have been made by civilian personnel without proper authorization. We're investigating the source." Hayes examines the uniform more closely, his trained eye recognizing quality workmanship despite the regulation violations. "This isn't amateur work. Someone with serious textile experience did this. The dye penetration is perfect. The pattern application shows professional technique." What Hayes doesn't say, but Thompson notices, is that during their conversation 2 different soldiers walk past the office wearing Chen's forbidden camouflage. Hayes's eyes pass over them without conscious recognition, even while he's actively discussing unauthorized uniform modifications. The psychological effectiveness is so complete that it operates even on officers specifically looking for regulation violations. November 12th brings the test that will determine whether Chen's innovation lives or dies. Major General Edwin Harding, commanding officer of the 32nd Infantry Division, arrives for a surprise inspection of supply operations. Harding has built his reputation on strict adherence to military regulations and has zero tolerance for unauthorized modifications of any kind. Chen watches from the supply tent as Harding's inspection team moves through the depot, checking equipment inventories and uniform compliance. 3 soldiers wearing his forbidden camouflage are working in plain sight, handling supply distribution duties. Harding's inspection team walks past them repeatedly without noticing the unauthorized modifications. The general's aide, Lieutenant Michael Brennan, conducts a detailed review of uniform specifications. He examines dozens of standard-issue camouflage patterns, checking colors against regulation charts and verifying pattern compliance. But when soldiers wearing Chen's modifications pass through his field of view, his attention slides past them like water off glass. Harding himself stops within 3 feet of Private Kowalski, who's wearing one of Chen's most dramatically modified uniforms. The general studies a supply manifest for 30 seconds, while Kowalski continues working directly in his peripheral vision. Harding never consciously registers the unauthorized camouflage pattern that would normally result in immediate disciplinary action. The inspection concludes with Harding commending the depot for exemplary uniform maintenance and regulation compliance. As his convoy departs, Chen realizes his forbidden camouflage has achieved something unprecedented in military history. It's so effective at avoiding detection that it can hide in plain sight from the very authorities trying to suppress it. But Chen also knows the ultimate test approaches. The 32nd Infantry Division is preparing for combat operations against Japanese forces who have spent years perfecting their ability to spot Allied positions. The forbidden camouflage will either prove its worth in actual combat conditions or get good men killed through overconfidence in untested techniques. What none of them know is that Japanese intelligence has been monitoring Allied camouflage development through captured equipment analysis. Their latest report to Imperial headquarters concludes that American forces continue to rely on inadequate concealment methods that pose minimal threat to experienced spotters. The Japanese are about to discover how catastrophically wrong their intelligence assessment has become. November 15, 1942. The transport ship USS President Hayes cuts through the coral blue waters of the Solomon Sea, carrying 1,800 men of the 32nd Infantry Division toward their first major combat engagement. In the ship's cramped quarters below deck, 43 soldiers, wearing Chen's forbidden camouflage, sit among their regulation-clad comrades, unaware they're about to participate in the most significant camouflage field test in military history. Japanese observers positioned on the ridgelines of Buna have been tracking Allied ship movements for weeks. Lieutenant Hiroshi Tanaka, one of the Imperial Army's most experienced spotters, has personally identified and catalogued American unit compositions based on uniform variations visible through his high-powered field glasses. His reports to regimental headquarters include detailed assessments of Allied camouflage effectiveness, consistently noting that American patterns create easily recognizable silhouettes against jungle backgrounds. What Tanaka doesn't know is that his proven ability to detect Allied positions is about to encounter something his training never prepared him for. The landing begins at 0430 hours on November 16th. Companies A and B establish the initial beachhead, while Company C, which includes 21 soldiers wearing Chen's modifications, moves inland to secure the jungle perimeter. Standard operating procedure calls for establishing concealed observation posts within 500 yards of the beach to monitor Japanese response. Private First Class Tommy Kowalski, wearing one of Chen's most dramatically modified uniforms, takes position behind a fallen coconut palm, with clear sight lines toward known enemy positions. The spot should provide excellent concealment according to field manual specifications. But Kowalski knows from experience that Japanese spotters seem to possess supernatural ability to detect American positions. At 0615 hours, Lieutenant Tanaka begins his morning reconnaissance sweep from his concealed position 800 yards inland. Through his Zeiss field glasses, he systematically scans the beachhead area, identifying individual Allied soldiers with the methodical precision that has made him legendary among his peers. He spots the machine gun nest at grid reference 247-391. He identifies the mortar position behind the supply dump. He counts 17 individual soldiers moving through the tree line. But something is wrong. Tanaka's trained eye registers movement in areas where his glasses show nothing significant. Shadows that shift without apparent cause. Vegetation that seems to move independently of wind patterns. His brain processes these anomalies as natural jungle phenomena, filing them away as unimportant background information. For the first time in 3 years of combat, Tanaka's spotting reports contain gaps, positions he knows must be occupied by Allied forces but cannot definitively identify. His superiors receive intelligence assessments marked with unprecedented uncertainty. Possible Allied positions instead of confirmed enemy locations. Private Kowalski, invisible to Tanaka's experienced observation, watches Japanese soldiers moving through predetermined patrol routes. The enemy appears confident, relaxed, operating under the assumption that their concealment superiority remains intact. They move in formations that would be suicidal if they suspected accurate Allied observation, but their intelligence indicates American spotting capabilities remain inadequate. The first engagement occurs at 10:30 hours, when a Japanese patrol stumbles into an American position manned by soldiers wearing standard regulation camouflage. The firefight lasts 18 minutes, resulting in 3 American casualties and 5 Japanese KIA. Both sides perform exactly as their training and experience predict. The second engagement happens 40 minutes later when another Japanese patrol approaches an area they believe to be unoccupied based on Lieutenant Tanaka's morning reconnaissance. Private Kowalski and 2 other soldiers wearing Chen's forbidden camouflage have been observing this patrol for 20 minutes, tracking their movement, counting weapons, identifying officers. The Japanese walk into a perfectly prepared ambush delivered by soldiers they never saw, despite passing within 30 yards of their positions. 7 enemy killed in action, 0 American casualties. The surviving Japanese radio man reports contact with invisible American forces before his transmission cuts off. By noon, the pattern becomes undeniable. Allied units wearing standard camouflage perform according to historical precedent, achieving tactical objectives at expected casualty rates. But units equipped with Chen's modifications operate with effectiveness levels that approach the theoretical maximum. They observe without being observed, strike without being detected, withdraw without being pursued. Captain Robert Hayes, commanding Baker Company, receives after-action reports that make no sense according to his combat experience. Soldiers who should be pinned down by Japanese spotters are moving freely through enemy-controlled terrain. Patrols that should be detected and engaged are completing reconnaissance missions without enemy contact. The tactical situation resembles no previous Allied operation in the Pacific Theater. At 1400 hours, Hayes personally observes something that challenges his understanding of jungle warfare. He watches Private Kowalski approach a Japanese observation post from an angle that should provide perfect visibility to enemy spotters. Hayes expects to see muzzle flashes, hear rifle fire, witness another good American soldier being cut down by superior enemy concealment techniques. Instead, Kowalski completes his approach undetected, observes the enemy position for 15 minutes, and withdraws without Japanese forces ever acknowledging his presence. The enemy spotters, trained professionals who have been identifying Allied positions with deadly accuracy for months, fail to notice an American soldier operating in plain sight at distances where detection should be automatic. Hayes keys his radio handset with trembling fingers. Base, this is Baker 6. Request immediate conference with supply personnel regarding uniform specifications. Priority Alpha. The message reaches Staff Sergeant Thompson at 14:30 hours. Thompson understands immediately that the forbidden camouflage has achieved something unprecedented in modern warfare. It has neutralized Japanese spotting superiority, the tactical advantage that has been killing Allied soldiers since the beginning of the Pacific Campaign. But Thompson also knows that official acknowledgement of Chen's innovation will trigger investigations, courts-martial, and systematic suppression of the technique by military bureaucracy that values regulation compliance over battlefield effectiveness. The choice facing the Allied command structure is identical to decisions that have shaped every major military innovation in history: embrace unauthorized effectiveness or maintain institutional control. Lieutenant Colonel Frank Ross receives Hayes's after-action report at 16:30 hours and immediately recognizes the implications. His explicit orders regarding unauthorized uniform modifications have been violated on a massive scale, but the tactical results suggest Chen's forbidden camouflage represents a revolutionary breakthrough in concealment technology. Ross faces the kind of decision that defines military careers. He can suppress the innovation to maintain his authority and protect institutional regulations, or he can acknowledge that a civilian Tailor has solved a problem that has been killing American soldiers while military engineers failed to develop effective solutions. What Ross doesn't know is that his decision will determine whether thousands of Allied soldiers live or die during the coming months of Pacific Theater operations. The forbidden camouflage works so effectively that it can shift the entire tactical balance between Allied forces and Japanese defenders who have built their defensive strategy around superior spotting capabilities. At 1700 hours, Ross makes the call that will either end his career or establish him as the commander who recognized battlefield innovation over bureaucratic compliance. He orders an immediate expansion of Chen's modification program, authorizing the civilian Tailor to equip entire companies with forbidden camouflage despite multiple regulation violations. The authorization reaches Chen's workshop at 1745 hours, carried by a runner who has been instructed to avoid official communication channels that would create documentary evidence of the unauthorized program. Chen reads the handwritten message 3 times, understanding that he has just received permission to violate military regulations on an unprecedented scale. By nightfall on November 16th, Chen is calculating production requirements for outfitting 2,000 soldiers with forbidden camouflage within 30 days. The logistical challenges seem impossible. The dye quantities alone would require sourcing botanical materials across hundreds of square miles of jungle terrain, while maintaining absolute secrecy about the unauthorized program. But Chen also knows that Japanese forces are preparing major counterattacks based on intelligence assessments that assume continued Allied camouflage inadequacy. The enemy's tactical planning depends on their ability to detect and target American positions with the same effectiveness they've demonstrated throughout the Pacific Campaign. The Japanese are about to discover that their fundamental assumptions about Allied capabilities have become catastrophically obsolete overnight. November 20th, 1942. The humid air inside Chen's expanded workshop carries the acrid smell of fermenting plant dyes as he supervises the most ambitious unauthorized manufacturing operation in Allied military history. 6 local women, recruited through contacts in the Port Moresby Chinese community, work alongside 3 Australian seamstresses whose husbands died at Singapore. They speak in whispers, understanding that discovery would mean immediate arrest for everyone involved. Chen has transformed the abandoned aircraft hangar into a clandestine textile laboratory that would impress industrial chemists. 50-gallon drums contain dye baths mixed from ironwood bark, crushed beetle shells, and mineral compounds extracted from volcanic soil. The recipes exist only in Chen's memory, formulated through trial and error using botanical knowledge passed down through 4 generations of Chinese tailors. The production rate reaches 12 modified uniforms per day, but Chen knows it's not enough. Intelligence reports indicate Japanese forces are massing for a major offensive, convinced that Allied camouflage inadequacy will allow them to identify and eliminate American positions with their traditional efficiency. The enemy's tactical planning assumes they retain decisive advantages in spotting and targeting that have defined Pacific theater engagements since December 1941. Private First Class Daniel Murphy, the same Marine who was pinned down by the supernatural sniper on Guadalcanal, receives his modified uniform on November 23rd. The fabric feels different, slightly rougher than regulation issue, and the pattern makes his eyes uncomfortable when he stares at it directly. The colors seem to shift depending on lighting conditions, creating visual uncertainty that makes Murphy question his own perception. Murphy tests the forbidden camouflage during routine patrol duties around Henderson Field. The results exceed every expectation based on his combat experience. Japanese spotters who consistently detected his previous positions fail to acquire target acquisition, even when Murphy deliberately exposes himself at ranges where engagement should be automatic. Enemy observers trained to identify the smallest movement anomalies seem unable to focus effectively on his modified uniform. The psychological impact proves as significant as the tactical advantage. For the first time since arriving in the Pacific, Murphy moves through contested terrain without the constant expectation of sudden death from invisible shooters. The forbidden camouflage doesn't just hide him from enemy observation, it liberates him from the paralyzing fear that has defined jungle warfare for every Allied soldier. Word spreads through the informal networks that actually control military operations. By November 25th, company commanders throughout the 32nd Infantry Division are quietly requesting Chen's modifications for their most experienced reconnaissance personnel, not through official channels that would trigger bureaucratic suppression, but through the practical arrangements that accomplish essential tasks while avoiding institutional interference. Staff Sergeant William Thompson coordinates the distribution network with the efficiency of a career logistics professional who understands that effective supply operations happen despite regulations rather than because of them. Modified uniforms reach frontline units through supply convoys that officially carry standard replacement equipment. The paperwork shows regulation compliance, while the actual cargo transforms Allied tactical capabilities. Japanese intelligence officers notice the change immediately but cannot explain it. Lieutenant Colonel Kenji Yamamoto, Chief Intelligence Analyst for the 18th Army, receives spotting reports that contradict 3 years of consistent data regarding Allied camouflage effectiveness. His most experienced observers report visual anomalies and uncertain target identification in areas where American presence is confirmed through other intelligence methods. Yamamoto's November 28th assessment to divisional headquarters acknowledges unprecedented gaps in reconnaissance effectiveness. Allied forces appear to have modified concealment techniques in ways that reduce observer confidence in target identification, recommend increased reliance on sound detection and movement pattern analysis rather than visual confirmation of enemy positions. The admission represents a fundamental shift in Japanese tactical thinking. For the first time since beginning Pacific operations, Imperial forces acknowledge that Allied concealment capabilities might pose genuine challenges to their established superiority in jungle warfare. The intelligence reports suggest enemy innovations that Japanese military doctrine hasn't encountered or prepared for. But the full implications become clear during the Battle of Buna Village on December 2, 1942. Australian and American forces launch coordinated attacks against Japanese defensive positions that have been considered impregnable based on the enemy's ability to detect and target Allied approach routes. The assault begins at 05:45 hours with artillery preparation followed by infantry advance through terrain that should provide perfect visibility for Japanese spotters. Sergeant Murphy leads a 12-man reconnaissance patrol wearing Chen's forbidden camouflage through jungle approaches that previous Allied units have found impossible to navigate without taking devastating casualties. The patrol moves within 200 yards of confirmed Japanese Japanese positions without triggering defensive fire that should have been automatic based on enemy observation capabilities. Japanese defenders, trained to identify Allied movement through subtle environmental changes, find themselves engaging targets they cannot clearly see or track. Their defensive fire becomes increasingly random, spraying ammunition at areas where they suspect Allied presence rather than engaging confirmed positions with precision fire. The tactical advantage that has defined Japanese defensive operations throughout the Pacific campaign begins to erode as their spotters lose confidence in target identification. Murphy's patrol completes detailed reconnaissance of Japanese defensive positions that previous intelligence gathering attempts couldn't approach without detection. They identify artillery positions, machine gun nests, communication trenches, and supply routes that enemy forces believed were invisible to Allied observation. The forbidden camouflage allows Allied reconnaissance to achieve information superiority for the first time in Pacific theater operations. The intelligence gathered by soldiers wearing Chen's modifications enables targeted artillery strikes that devastate Japanese positions with unprecedented accuracy. Enemy forces find themselves under precise bombardment of positions they considered perfectly concealed. Their communications intercepts reveal growing confusion about Allied reconnaissance capabilities that seem to have improved dramatically overnight. Captain Robert Hayes receives battle damage assessments that read like fiction compared to his previous combat experience. Allied casualties drop to levels considered impossible based on historical precedent, while Japanese defensive effectiveness decreases proportionally. The tactical balance that has favored enemy forces throughout jungle warfare engagements shifts decisively toward Allied advantage, but the success creates new problems for military leadership. Lieutenant Colonel Frank Ross must explain tactical improvements that officially don't exist. His battle reports to divisional headquarters describe enhanced Allied performance, without mentioning unauthorized camouflage modifications that violate explicit military regulations. The documentation requirements for combat effectiveness clash with the need to maintain secrecy about the forbidden innovation. Ross faces intense questioning from Major General Edwin Harding during the December 8th operations review. Harding demands explanations for casualty rates that exceed projected Allied performance by margins that suggest fundamental changes in tactical capabilities. The general's questions probe for evidence of new equipment, revised training procedures, or tactical innovations that might account for unprecedented combat effectiveness. Colonel, your casualty rates are inconsistent with intelligence projections based on Japanese defensive capabilities, Harding states, studying after-action reports that challenge his understanding of Pacific theater operations. Either our intelligence regarding enemy spotting effectiveness was completely wrong, or something has changed about your unit's concealment capabilities. Ross chooses his words with the precision of an officer whose career depends on navigating between operational success and regulatory compliance. Sir, we've implemented enhanced camouflage techniques based on local environmental conditions and combat experience feedback from frontline personnel. The explanation is technically accurate while avoiding specific mention of Chen's unauthorized modifications. Ross understands that official acknowledgement would trigger investigations that could suppress the innovation just as it proves its battlefield value. The institutional pressure to maintain regulatory compliance conflicts with tactical reality that forbidden camouflage saves lives and wins engagements. Harding's response will determine whether Chen's innovation spreads throughout Allied forces or dies through bureaucratic suppression. The general represents military thinking that values institutional control over battlefield innovation, but he also commands forces whose survival depends on tactical advantages that unauthorized modifications provide. The decision facing Allied leadership mirrors choices that have shaped every major military innovation throughout history: embrace effectiveness that violates established procedures, or maintain institutional authority at the cost of operational capability. The forbidden camouflage has proven its value in combat conditions, but its unauthorized nature threatens the regulatory framework that military bureaucracy considers essential for maintaining organizational control. What happens next will determine whether thousands of Allied soldiers receive life-saving camouflage improvements, or whether institutional priorities suppress battlefield innovation that could fundamentally alter the Pacific campaign's trajectory. Samuel Chen never received official recognition for his forbidden camouflage. No medals, no commendations, no mention in divisional histories. When the war ended in August 1945, he quietly returned to Hong Kong and reopened his father's tailor shop on Nathan Road. He died in 1967, taking his dye formulas and pattern techniques to the grave. But Chen's innovation spread far beyond the 32nd Infantry Division. By war's end, variations of his visual static camouflage had been adopted by special operations units across the Pacific Theater. Marine raiders, Army Rangers, and OSS operatives all wore modifications of the forbidden pattern that military engineers still couldn't officially acknowledge. Post-war analysis credited improved Allied camouflage effectiveness with saving an estimated 12,000 American lives during Pacific operations. Modern military camouflage owes its existence to a civilian Tailor who understood something the experts missed. Digital camouflage patterns used by today's armed forces operate on the same principle Chen discovered in 1942, creating visual confusion rather than environmental mimicry. The irregular pixel patterns that make contemporary soldiers nearly invisible employ the psychological principles of visual noise that Chen pioneered with plant dyes and bamboo brushes. The forbidden camouflage succeeded because one man refused to accept that good soldiers should die for bad regulations. Chen proved that innovation doesn't always come from laboratories or military academies. Sometimes it comes from someone who simply refuses to watch others suffer while bureaucrats debate proper procedures. The greatest breakthroughs happen when practical necessity meets the courage to ignore institutional authority. Samuel Chen had both. That's why Allied soldiers came home alive instead of coming home in boxes, and why the Japanese never understood what hit them until it was too late.